The sun was already rising when the kindergarten class at Milltown Elementary buzzed with excitement. It was April 14th, 2003, and 23 children, aged 5 and 6, were lined up near the curb outside the red brick school building chattering with glee. Mrs. Keller, the lead teacher, wore a navy windbreaker and a lanyard full of emergency contacts. Beside her, Mr. Hughes, the assistant teacher, was adjusting a cooler filled with juice boxes and string cheese into the storage compartment beneath the bus. It was their spring nature trip to Sable Ridge Park, a sprawling forest preserve with hiking trails, waterfalls, and enough birds to keep the kids engaged all day. The bus driver, an older man named Dennis, greeted each child with a high five or a smile as they climbed aboard, backpacks bouncing behind them. "Seatbelts on, everybody," Mrs. Keller called as she counted heads. 23, all here. The bus engine rumbled to life and slowly pulled out of the school parking lot, tires crunching on gravel. The kids sang silly songs, their voices high and off-key, the windows cracked open just enough to let in the fresh spring air. Trees blurred past as they exited the town and followed the winding two-lane road that would take them to the forest. Sable Ridge was 50 minutes from Milltown. The last 15 minutes took them off the main road and onto a less maintained road, the kind where potholes were filled with rocks and road signs leaned like they were tired. Dennis drove slow, his jaw set, focused. The radio didn't work in the hills, and cell signal had been spotty for years, but nobody seemed concerned. This trip had been made annually since 1987 without a hitch. They arrived just before 10 a.m. The kids spilled out of the bus, laughing, tugging their mini backpacks over their shoulders. The trailhead began at the far end of the parking lot, marked by a wooden arch and a map under plexiglass. Mrs. Keller gathered everyone. "All right, little explorers," she said. "Remember our buddy system and stay on the trail. We'll hike to the waterfall first, then lunch at the picnic area." The line of children moved like a train through the forest, 2 by 2. They passed birch trees and wildflowers, squirrels darting up trunks and a pair of deer watching from a distance. The trail was well maintained and clearly marked with orange symbols on tree trunks. A few wooden signs pointed the way to attractions: waterfall, 1.5 miles, observation deck, 2.3 miles, ranger station, 0.9 miles. They reached the waterfall a little before 11 a.m. It wasn't huge, maybe 12 feet high, but it was enough to thrill the kids. Hughes helped some of them over slippery rocks for a closer look while Mrs. Keller sat with a few kids who were tired. Dennis stayed by the picnic tables, cleaning out the bus windows with paper towels and talking to a ranger who just arrived to check the parking lot. Lunch was peanut butter sandwiches, grapes, crackers, and juice boxes. The kids sat on the wooden benches, legs swinging. A few chased butterflies between bites. At 12:30 p.m., Mrs. Keller clapped her hands. "Okay, next stop is the observation deck. It's a bit of a climb, but the view is worth it." The kids whooped and ran to fall in line. The trail to the deck narrowed slightly but was still safe. It led through denser woods, the sunlight dimming beneath the taller trees. Birds chirped high above them. A few kids complained of tired legs, but the promise of a big wooden deck that makes you feel like you're in a treehouse pushed them on. Mr. Hughes brought up the rear, keeping count. The deck stood on stilts overlooking a long valley, where treetops stretched for miles. Everyone took turns looking out, some holding the railing and whispering, "Wow," under their breath. It was peaceful, calm in a way cities never were. It was around 1:45 p.m. when Mrs. Keller called for them to start heading back. "Same buddy, same line," she reminded. "Trail only, no shortcuts." They made it about a third of the way back when Lucy Granger, a quiet girl with red pigtails, tugged at her teacher's jacket. "Mrs. Keller, "Where's Jason?" Jason Finelli had been Lucy's partner since they left the waterfall. Mrs. Keller turned fast. "Jason," she called, her voice raised. There was no answer. She immediately told Mr. Hughes to start checking the line, head to toe. "Count them, and make sure everyone's here," she said, her voice now tight. One by one they scanned every child. It wasn't just Jason. 2 more were missing, then 5, then 7. "Stop," Mrs. Keller barked. "Nobody move. Everyone sit. Sit now." The rest of the class was huddled on the trail while the teachers sprinted back and forth, calling names, running down both directions of the path. Jason, Kelly, Ahmed, Sienna, Nolan, Thomas, Janie. 7 children. Dennis, still at the picnic area, said he hadn't seen anyone come down. "I've been cleaning the bus this whole time," he said, clearly shaken. Mr. Hughes grabbed his Nokia phone, but there was no signal. Mrs. Keller's phone was dead. She yelled to Dennis, "Go to the ranger station, now, bring help." It took 20 minutes for the ranger station to respond. A team of 3 rangers arrived in ATVs and began sweeping the trails. They asked questions rapidly. When was the last time anyone saw Jason? Did the kids mention splitting off? Was there an accident? Mrs. Keller was in full panic, eyes wide, shivering despite the sun. By 3 p.m., all remaining children were loaded back onto the bus. Dennis drove them to the ranger station, while the search teams expanded their perimeter. Helicopters arrived around 5:30 p.m. Dogs were brought in. That night, the town of Milltown was informed. 7 children missing, a search underway. By the next morning, it was 23. The remaining children, who had supposedly been accounted for, never made it home. Their seats on the bus were empty. Parents arrived to a school gym packed with police, rangers, and the faint smell of stale orange juice. Nobody understood how it had happened. No signs of struggle, no footprints off trail, no clothing, no backpacks, no screams, no sightings, just gone. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The aftermath of the disappearance rocked the small town of Milltown in ways no one had prepared for. The next morning, news vans parked outside Milltown Elementary like vultures. Microphones poked out from open windows, satellite dishes rotated in the wind, cameras were everywhere on the street, at the school gates, even outside the homes of the missing children. The town, which once felt like the kind of place where neighbors left their doors unlocked, suddenly felt like a trap. Parents gripped their children tighter. Playgrounds stood silent. Teachers cried in their cars before walking into school. The search wasn't just about missing kids now, it was about understanding how 23 children could vanish in broad daylight with no explanation. Detective Raymond Elkins from the State Bureau arrived with his team early that morning. A tall man in his late 40s with a sharp crew cut and coffee permanently in hand, Elkins wasted no time. His first stop was the Sable Ridge Ranger Station. "I want every inch of that park map," he told the head ranger. "We're not going home until we find something." Dozens of volunteers from neighboring towns joined the search. Dogs were redeployed, drones flew overhead, helicopters buzzed low enough to shake tree branches. They searched for days, backpacks, clothes, toys, anything. But the forest gave nothing. Elkins questioned everyone. Dennis, the bus driver, was grilled for hours. "I didn't leave the bus," he insisted, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. "I was wiping windows, then I sat and waited. I didn't hear anything unusual." Mrs. Keller, still shaken, repeated every detail she could remember. "I counted them. They were there. We went to the waterfall, then the deck. They were all laughing, talking, they were fine." Mr. Hughes blamed himself. "I was the rear, I counted too. I thought I counted right. How could I have missed that many kids gone?" Surveillance cameras at the ranger station showed nothing. No strangers had entered the trail that day. No suspicious cars. No strangers lurking. Just the school bus arriving and leaving. 2 weeks passed, then 4. The media cycle moved on. National coverage faded, but Milltown didn't forget. It couldn't. Every lamppost still had missing posters. The school hallways were emptier, quieter. Grief counselors tried to help, but how do you help when there's no body to bury? No answer to hold on to. Detective Elkins didn't quit. He pushed deeper. He combed through maps of the park. He brought in experts, trail specialists, survivalists, even botanists. Maybe there was a sinkhole. Maybe toxic plants. Maybe they'd wandered into something natural, something real. One idea stuck. There's a gap, one of the rangers told him, laying out a topographic map. See here. This ridge, no marked trails. We've had rock slides here before. Could be an unmarked path, maybe even a hidden drop. Elkins sent teams out immediately. Ropes, climbing gear, infrared cameras. They rappelled down rock faces and searched every cave mouth. But there was nothing. Not even broken branches. Back in town, parents began to turn on one another. Accusations flew. Someone must have followed them. There's no way the teachers missed everything. It was planned. This was no accident. At town meetings, voices rose. Some parents blamed Dennis. Others pointed fingers at the rangers. The tension was thick enough to split the town in half. Then came the 8th week. It was a Sunday. Ben Moffat, a local fisherman who spent his weekends on Whitecap Lake, was packing up for the morning when his line snagged on something heavy. He tugged once, then twice, thinking it was a branch. When it came loose and broke the surface, he stumbled back. It was a child's backpack. He radioed the rangers immediately. Within hours, the shoreline was swarmed by law enforcement. Divers went in. By nightfall, they had pulled 7 bodies from the lake. The next morning, 6 more. By Tuesday, all 23 had been found. All of them were still wearing their field trip t-shirts. Each child had their name tags still pinned to their shirt. No signs of struggle. No bruises. No visible trauma. But they were dead.
Happy Fee.
The town shut down. People wept openly in the streets. A church service was held in the high school gym to allow space for everyone. The coffins, tiny and white, lined the stage. Parents sat in folding chairs, barely breathing. The autopsies brought more questions than answers.
Dr.
Lori Cavallini, the coroner, stood before the mayor and investigators and gave her findings. They drowned, she said.
All of them.
Lungs filled with lake water. But here's what I don't understand. There's no sign they struggled. No water in their stomachs, which suggests they didn't swallow it while alive. And based on liver temps and body conditions, they died recently. Days ago, not weeks ago. Silence filled the room. Detective Elkins leaned forward. You're saying they didn't die until this week? Cavallini nodded. Rough estimate, 48 to 72 hours ago. But they disappeared 8 weeks ago. The bodies hadn't decomposed the way they should have. Clothes were barely weathered. Nails weren't grown. Hair hadn't changed. It was like they'd vanished into thin air, stayed frozen in time, then dumped back in the lake days ago. And the lake, Whitecap, wasn't even near the trail. It was over 15 miles from the observation deck. The access road to the lake had a locked gate, always chained. Only rangers had keys. Security footage from that gate, nothing. No one had gone in or out. The town's theories went wild, but Elkins didn't buy any of it. Somebody took them, he muttered to himself, staring at photos pinned to his board. Held them, somewhere close, and then dumped them when things got too hot.
He created a new theory.
The kids had been taken off the trail quietly. Maybe lured, maybe drugged, moved in batches. That was the only way 23 kids could vanish without screams, without a fight. Then they were kept hidden for weeks. Somewhere cold, underground maybe.
A shed.
A cellar, a bunker, but who could have pulled off something that massive? And why? The FBI took over soon after. Profiles were drawn. Background checks on every adult involved were redone from scratch. But the case slowly lost traction.
Leads dried up.
Tips went nowhere. And in time, like most unsolved stories, it became something people didn't talk about out loud anymore. It turned into a story, whispered at sleepovers, mentioned only in hushed tones. But those closest to it, the parents, the teachers, the officers, they never forgot. Especially not Detective Elkins. Because 5 years later, something else happened. 5 years had passed since the heartbreaking discovery of the kindergarten class bodies. Milltown had never quite healed. The memories of those missing children lingered like a shadow on every street corner, every school hallway. The town had moved on, but Detective Raymond Elkins had not. He was still haunted, not by ghosts or superstition, but by unanswered questions and the frustrating silence of a case gone cold. The discovery of the bodies had shattered the town's fragile sense of safety, but it had also opened a dark, puzzling mystery that no one could crack. How could the children have disappeared from a well-trailed park, only to be found miles away in a locked, guarded lake? How had they survived for weeks, with no sign of injury or distress? Why did the bodies show signs of death only days before being found, not the moment they vanished? Elkins often sat in his small office, running through the details again and again, chasing leads that always seemed to disappear at the worst moments. He refused to give up. One chilly autumn afternoon, Elkins received a call that pulled him back into the world he had desperately tried to leave behind. A man named Frank Cooper, an ex-convict who had served time for petty crimes and recently returned to Milltown, claimed he had information about the case. Elkins agreed to meet Cooper in a small diner on the edge of town. The place was quiet, filled mostly with locals sipping coffee and flipping through newspapers. Cooper was nervous, constantly glancing at the door as he slid into the booth. "I wasn't sure if I should tell anyone," he said quietly, "but I can't live with it anymore." Elkins leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "What do you know?" Cooper swallowed hard. "I saw something the day the kids disappeared. I wasn't supposed to be near the park, but I was walking home from a job and I heard a commotion." He hesitated, then continued. "There was a truck parked just off the main trail. I heard voices, quiet but urgent. I saw a few men moving things. It looked like they were loading crates. And there was a man with a van, not the school bus, some other vehicle." Elkins' mind raced. "Did you get a license plate? Did you see their faces?" Cooper shook his head. "No, it was dark, but I did notice the truck had a logo, something like a pest control company. I remember because I saw the same truck around the neighborhood a few times later." Elkins jotted down the details. This was the first solid lead in years. The next day, Elkins and a small team started digging. They traced the truck's logo back to a company run by a man named Carl Jensen. Jensen had a clean record, but a reputation for being secretive. He wasn't on any suspect list before. Elkins arranged a meeting under the guise of a routine inspection. Jensen was cooperative, but defensive. "I'm just a businessman," he said. "I don't know anything about missing kids." But Elkins noticed small inconsistencies in Jensen's story. Jensen said the truck was in the area for pest control, but local residents had no record of calls that day. Then a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A local teenager named Sarah, who often helped her father with landscaping, came forward with something she'd kept quiet. "I saw Jensen near the lake a few days after the kids disappeared. He was unloading boxes. It was late, and he looked nervous. I thought it was odd." Elkins coordinated a search of Jensen's property the next morning. What they found was chilling. Behind Jensen's house, hidden beneath a tarp, were several crates. They were empty, but they had signs of recent use. scratches, dirt, and a faint smell of chemicals. Inside Jensen's workshop, Elkins found more troubling evidence: children's belongings, backpacks, shoes, even a torn field trip t-shirt, matching the ones worn on the day of the disappearance. Jensen was arrested that afternoon. Under intense questioning, he eventually broke down. He claimed he didn't mean for things to go as far as they did. According to him, it started as a plan to make quick money. He'd been struggling, and when he saw the kids unattended at the park, he panicked. "I didn't know what to do," Jensen confessed. "I thought if I kept them quiet for a while, I could ask for money from their parents and return them. But things spiraled out of control. I panicked, and I didn't know how to fix it." Elkins was stunned by the confession, but also skeptical. The cold reality was Jensen's story didn't explain the kids' deaths or how their bodies ended up in the lake weeks later. The investigation uncovered more details. Jensen had an accomplice, a man named Ray Carlton. Carlton worked with him in the pest control business and had a criminal record for violent offenses. When Jensen was arrested, Carlton disappeared. The search for Carlton began immediately. Meanwhile, Elkins focused on reconstructing the timeline of those missing weeks. Interviews with Jensen painted a grim picture. The children were kept in a small dark room in the workshop, fed little and terrified. Jensen said he tried to keep them calm, but the kids got sick, and that's when things got out of hand. Elkins suspected neglect, but it wasn't the full story. Then an anonymous tip led investigators to an abandoned cabin several miles outside Milltown. The cabin had been used by Carlton during his criminal activities, but had been vacant for years. Inside they found signs of recent activity, footprints, discarded food wrappers, and most disturbingly, traces of blood. The investigation took on a new urgency. It was clear the story was far from over. Carlton remained missing, but the police had a fresh lead and a growing sense of urgency. The town waited with bated breath, caught between hope and fear. Would justice come? Would answers finally emerge? Or was the nightmare only beginning? The sun was just rising over Milltown when Detective Raymond Elkins got the call he had been waiting for. Ray Carlton had been spotted near the outskirts of town, close to the abandoned cabin. The area was thick with trees, and early morning mist curled between the branches like thin fingers reaching out to conceal the truth. Elkins drove fast, sirens off, adrenaline pounding through his veins. He pulled up near the cabin and saw a small group of officers moving cautiously toward the dilapidated structure. The tension was thick, the air heavy with anticipation. Elkins didn't wait. He grabbed his gear and sprinted toward the cabin with two officers. The door was hanging off its hinges, and the floor creaked under their weight. Inside, the room was cold and dark, but daylight cut through cracks in the boarded-up windows, revealing scattered belongings and overturned furniture. Suddenly, a noise from the back room, shuffling feet, the snap of broken glass. Elkins motioned for the others to stay back. Drawing his pistol, he edged closer. "Carlton," Elkins called out. "Come out with your hands up." A figure appeared, gaunt and desperate, eyes wild and darting. Carlton was clutching something in his hands, a small worn-out backpack covered in dirt and stains. "I'm done running," Carlton said hoarsely, dropping the bag and raising his hands. His voice was low but steady. "I'll talk." The cabin was secured. Carlton was cuffed and led out without incident. Back at the station, the interrogation room was cold and bare, the single light above casting shadows that danced over Carlton's tired face. Elkins sat across from him, eyes locked. "Start from the beginning," Elkins said firmly. Carlton took a deep breath, his story spilling out in broken pieces. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he repeated, echoing Jensen's earlier words. "We planned to keep the kids only for a little while to scare the parents into paying us." Carlton explained how the plan had spiraled out of control. After they'd taken the children from the park, they hid them in Jensen's workshop. But the cramped, dark space made the kids sick and scared. Food was scarce, and tension grew. Carlton confessed to the terrible truth. When one of the children became seriously ill, Jensen panicked and suggested moving them to the cabin, hoping isolation would keep things quiet while they figured out what to do next. Weeks passed, but the children's health worsened. Neither man had medical training, and fear and guilt turned their behavior erratic. Carlton admitted to arguing with Jensen over how to handle the situation, but neither could face the consequences of their actions. Then came the final tragedy. One morning, several children were found lifeless in the cabin. Some had died of dehydration and exposure. Others showed signs of starvation. The men panicked, realizing they couldn't hide the truth any longer. To cover up, they transported the bodies to the lake near Milltown, hoping the water would conceal their crime. The men left the scene quickly, confident the bodies would never be found. But nature had other plans. 8 weeks later, the fisherman who pulled the bodies from the water unwittingly uncovered a horror that shocked the town to its core. Carlton's confession gave the investigators the full picture. The children's disappearance was no accident or supernatural mystery. It was a nightmare caused by fear, greed, and terrible decisions. The families finally learned the truth, painful and raw. The trial that followed was long and grueling, but justice was served. Carlton and Jensen were convicted of multiple counts of child neglect and manslaughter. The town mourned, but found a sense of closure. Detective Elkins stood quietly at the memorial service for the children, watching as parents placed flowers beneath a simple stone etched with their names. He knew the scars this case left on Milltown would never fully fade. But in the silence he found hope. Hope that even in the darkest moments, the truth could be uncovered, and justice, though slow, could prevail. The memory of those children would never be forgotten. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, in order to strengthen our community. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and what time you are currently watching this video.